Let's go back to the book of Colossians. Colossians chapter 1 is where we want to go back to. We had focused on the earlier verses in chapter 1. Actually, I think it was for a prayer meeting not too awful long ago, but I want to kind of focus a little more on the book of Colossians here. We may do it somewhat in the evening, Sunday evenings or something. But verse number 15 is where I want to draw your attention to begin. Colossians 1 and verse number 15. Who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creature. Now he's talking about Jesus here. Ben just talking about that. That goes back again to our previous study. And then it says, for by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things were created by him and for him. And he is before all things, and by him all things consist. And he is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he might have the preeminence. For it pleased the Father that in him should all fullness dwell, and having made peace through the blood of his cross, by him to reconcile all things unto himself. By him, I say, whether they be things in earth or things in heaven, and you that were sometime alienated and enemies in your mind by wicked works, yet now hath he reconciled in the body of his flesh through death, to present you holy and unblameable and unreprovable in his sight. If ye continue in the faith, grounded and settled, and be not moved away from the hope of the gospel which ye have heard, and which was preached to every creature which is under heaven, whereof I, Paul, am made a minister. I know that's only a semicolon, and we could continue on there. But we're going to stop right there, and I especially want to focus on the last part of verse number 18. For all through this passage, he's really talking about the place of Christ and what part he has in our redemption and things of that sort. And so here we read the words, again, right there at the end of verse number 18, that in all things he might have the preeminence. So for a few moments here this evening, I'm going to talk to you about the most important thing. The most important thing. Many years ago, I was pastoring in a little place and had through contacts, I was able to find a farm some distance away. It was a bit of a drive, but I was able to go there and could take my bow and hunt in that area. And it was a pretty nice place. But I went there one evening and was preparing to hunt. I began getting my things out of the back, and I got my tree stand on my shoulders, and picked up my various things there, and began to head out for my spot. Unfortunately, there were a few other people around there in the field. I think they were kind of visiting the farmer and some other people there. And as I began to walk out across there, kind of right not far from where these men were at, I began to feel like something's not right here. It doesn't feel like I have enough stuff. And suddenly it dawned on me, I'm not carrying my bow. And so I turned around, I went back to my vehicle and opened it up and looked inside. I was sort of already getting heartsick, thinking, I'm afraid I know what the problem is. I don't think I brought it with me. And I went over there. Of course, again, these guys, they've been watching. They've seen what was going on somewhat. And I got over there and I have no bow. And so I don't remember if I told the fellow or not, but I had to get back in my car, drive all the way back home because I didn't have one of the most important things. I could have gotten by without my tree stand probably. I could have gotten by without some of the other things in my pouch or whatever else it was, but I couldn't get by without my bow. I know that's maybe something pretty simple, but sometimes if we're not careful, we can end up living life, even the Christian life, without the most important thing. We can come to church and our focus is not on the most important thing. And yet the verse here says that in all things, he might have the preeminence. He would be first place. That he would be the center of our attention. And again, when we begin thinking about the issues of first place, obviously, again, we're focusing on Christ, but we could just think about several circumstances in life that sometimes you might think is the most important. And of course, I shared one embarrassing moment for me. But then you also have other things, even in the church service. Sometimes we might think, well, okay, that's the sermon. And by the way, the Bible does indicate that it is the foolishness of preaching that helps to see souls brought to the kingdom. But we might think it's the sermon. Maybe sometimes even some might think, well, no, that's more of the music or the fellowship. In a shipwreck, probably the most important thing would be the lifeboat, even though some other times it might seem like it's in the way. In a meal, depending on your perspective, it might be salt. So it depends on the circumstances. But in life, it's always and only Jesus. He must be the first importance in our lives. And Paul makes that pretty clear even here in this passage. We can get a lot of other things right. We can focus on a lot of other things. And we can think that we're doing well. But if we miss this key point, that He is the priority, then we're off track. And so today, this evening, just kind of winding down the day here a little bit. These verses here point out the importance of Christ in our focus. And I just want to remind us of this again. Here we are right at a new year, and we need this reminder that He has to be first. He has to be above all. He's the creator. He's the sustainer of all things. We can read about that here in some of these verses. Verse 16 in particular, you'd find that. You can kind of go beyond that even to the part of redemption where He paid the price for us, and really He's our only hope of salvation. He's done all that was needed to pay for our sins, and He deserves more than just a partial allegiance or just an occasional nod with our lives, at least. You know, we sort of do some sort of, I don't know what you want to call it, but, we kind of get everything in line and, well, okay, Lord, here's your part. Here's your part. That's not all He's looking for. He has to be first and foremost in the center of our attention. And yet again, it so often doesn't happen that way. I know we're familiar with His involvement. Do we really recognize that our life is all about Him? So let's just take a few moments to look at how He is first. Part of what we find right here, first of all, He is the focus. He is the first place in power. Now, I know that might be sort of, well, we understand, okay, God is all powerful, and we recognize Jesus, of course, He is powerful. But notice here in verse 16, by Him were all things created. He is the creator, and He is far above, it mentions here, thrones, dominions, principalities, powers. All things were created by Him and for Him. He has all power. Maybe sometimes we need to just stop for a moment and just recognize that the God we serve, the God we're called to serve, has all the power. He is first. We might sometimes think we want to get things in our own hands, so to speak, and we want to do this or that. We want to kind of arrange all the details ourselves the way we want to, but He is the one with all power. I know sometimes even these days we can kind of focus on all the different other leaders around us, and the world's in turmoil, and we may sometimes wonder, but God is not at all coward or just wondering what He's going to do with the leaders of the world. All of them together, He's created every throne, every power. By Him all things were created, and they are for Him. By Him all things consist, verse 17 says as well. We've been placed here by the power of God. The voice, we might say, we think of it as, of course, we're focusing here right on Jesus. That's what Paul's talking about. He's saying that by Him, these things have taken place. And so, and we find in John as well, the Gospel of John, that He is the Word. And so we think about Him being the Creator, the one who spoke these things into existence. We were made for the pleasure of God by the power of God. One other aspect to this is the heartwarming side of it. yes, we recognize there is a powerful God or before whom we maybe should bow down and we're cowed into humility. And yet there's an aspect here also that is actually something to make us run to him. He has all the power that we need. He can give us the strength that we need. He has created us, first of all. He knows all about the powers against us. But when we know him, his power is on our side. He is first in power. And as much as people may try to emphasize the huge adversary, the roaring lion, and all of the mindset of almost a defeatist mindset that the enemy of our souls is, don't forget that God is all powerful, and he also made Lucifer, who became the devil. He is still in charge, far away above all principalities and powers that might seek to do us harm. Rather than seeking to somehow overcome the enemy through our own weakness, really is about what it comes down to. May we run to the one who has all power. He is first in power. Secondly, he is also first in honor. First in honor. We notice another aspect here to the preeminence of Christ. It's found in the reference made to his sacrifice for us. He is our Redeemer. He has bought us. And so you can find there that you kind of jump down to verse number 20. It says, having made peace through the blood of his cross, by him to reconcile all things unto himself. And he's referring to the redemption. I believe it's maybe verse 14 also makes reference to that as well. In whom we have redemption through his blood, even the forgiveness of sins. So we can find forgiveness. He has given us the way to heaven. And I believe that even though, yes, we ought to honor him because of his power, we ought to recognize the preeminence of him in his power. We also need to recognize the wonderful blessing to honor the one who has died for us, paid for our redemption. Because of his suffering, we are bought by the blood of Jesus and brought into peace with God. We can have a relationship with God. We can have the hope of heaven. And really, it ought to stir our hearts to honor and glorify him. Let me just take a few minutes to ask you how you think you honor him. What do you do that you think honors the Lord? You know, we would have maybe a number of things we would focus on. Maybe you'd say, well, I go to church. I'm doing this or that. I'm trying to do my part. Maybe you would say, well, I know my songs. My songs are about him. Obviously, we might think, well, okay, the message. We talked about that earlier. And maybe the message is a big part of that. But maybe you'd go a little bit further and you'd say, well, my songs do that, or maybe my testimonies, that's what gives him glory. Even when we leave church, though, our thoughts ought to be on him. Our home should be honoring to him. Our job should be honoring to him. We ought to honor him in every part of our lives. He's supposed to be the most important thing to us. Not really thing, person to us. And that needs to be a reality. He is first in honor. We owe him everything. All of our honor ought to go to him. But that kind of leads us into the last one I want to touch on quickly here this evening. He is first in authority. You see, when you bring in his power, combined with his honor, that brings to the place where he is our authority. You jump back to the focus of verse number 18, and what's he talking about here? Yes, he is the head of the church. That means whatever even what we're doing here as we worship together, this is for God's glory. He is the authority. He is the one who has established the worship that we bring. He's told us not to forsake the assembling of ourselves together. And so, as he is the authority, and of course that brings us back to his word, that's what we have to go back to. His authority is what matters. I have a feeling some people don't really want to even think about Jesus being the creator or God being the creator, because they don't want to bring themselves under his authority. And yet, it has to be that case. Yes, I do have someone that I answer to, and I must submit myself to him. But far too many people, they balk at that. They don't like that idea. And yet, as he has all power, and as he has all honor, he deserves all my obedience. But being a Christian isn't really about putting Jesus first. And his authority is what really matters. It doesn't matter what anybody else says. If he says no, that's what it means. Our duty, first, last, and always, is to obey him. And so as we bring it to a close this evening, I want you to recognize that our duty is to make him first. First in every part of our worship. First in every aspect of our lives. Is he first in your life, even this evening?